Good morning, everyone. First off, thank you, Commissioner Franz, for an awful lot of years of dedicated service to the state, a position that we all depend on to have accurate data and the ability to be able to work with all of us in the legislature. I'm grateful. Dr. Kalmakaitis, thank you again. Thank you for your patience as I ask you the same question 6 or 7 times, and Budget Director Rayton, hundreds of hours of making sure we all know what structural balance means. Good morning to all of you. This budget forecast is good economic news for Minnesota. We must build upon the smart decisions that got us to this strong position. The last session in the legislature, we invested in our children's education. We protected Minnesota's access to affordable health care. And for the first time in almost 20 years, we gave 1.3 million middle-class Minnesotans an income tax cut on the rate. We proved we could govern together for the good of Minnesota. We've been disciplined, we've kept our eyes on the long term, and we've invested in the things that make our state grow. This session, we must come together again as one Minnesota to build upon the good work. We must exercise caution to protect our fiscal stability. We must pay back the budget reserves that you heard, and I hope after hearing the experts, there is still $491 million in the tails that are left, and I'd like to just note that the decision on the budget reserves was based on data. It was based on economic data over a very long period of time. The reason that we came to those numbers and the reason it's important to get back up before they were set, that's a 95% confidence interval to withstand stresses into our economy. Anything we do that's less of that increases risks to those basic programs. And we have a responsibility as the legislature passed and appropriated money to make sure that those programs are carried out. That's the way we can ensure we do that. We must listen to what our communities are telling us, and they're urgently telling us they need our support to increase access to safe drinking water and affordable housing, fix local roads and bridges, and improve safety infrastructure, and protect our lakes and rivers. That's why I've unveiled a $2 billion local jobs and projects plan that would take care of what we have, prepare us for the future, and keep our economy strong. Whether it's upgrading the deteriorating storm sewer system in Minneapolis or rebuilding the historic town hall that burned down in Ellsworth. These are the projects that improve quality of life for citizens in all corners of the state. We also heard in the previous presentations that our businesses are struggling to find workers. Investing more than $480 million in our higher education institution job training programs through the local jobs and project plan provides our students with a world-class education and develops the talent that Minnesota's economy needs to continue to produce results like you're seeing. We must pass the robust plan. There's no reason not to do it. We're at historically low interest rates, and the change in just from the November forecast to now is enough money to pay for the $2 billion bonding bill in and of itself. This session, we also need to tackle those pressing needs that face us today, like replenishing the disaster relief account, improving the safety of our farmers, ensuring Minnesota is prepared to respond to things like coronavirus, and making sure that all Minnesotans have access to affordable insulin. And we must think to the future by investing in Minnesota's children. These are the actions we need to take to make the state the best in the country for our kids, including ensuring every child in Minnesota receives a high-quality education, no matter who they are or where they're at. I look forward to working with the legislature again. Our top priority for this session is to get the local jobs and projects, the bonding bill done. It's to make sure we replenish our budget reserves, and then to think towards the future how we invest this budget surplus in the future. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Governor, you've been in office a little over a year. Can you take credit for some of this performance yet?
I probably should. Yeah, that's what I was just saying. It seems like it. I think what I'll take credit for is working together with folks who understand about stability. I think I was certainly standing on the shoulders of giants, and I will once again stress the decision in 2011 to put in the budget reserves and to move that money over was absolutely one of the smartest things that we've done in an awful long time. I will take credit for keeping us disciplined, for keeping a budget that doesn't overspend, to understand that if you do tax cuts, you have to pay for them, and to invest in the things necessary, working with the legislature. And I think they should be proud of what we were able to do to be able to continue to grow the economy. What we're seeing is, especially in the upper Midwest, Minnesota's economy is outperforming our neighbors, and that is because of these smart investments.
Governor, a two-part question. Is there room for tax cuts now? That's question number one. Question number two, What about a larger bonding bill than $2 billion, given this additional surplus?
Well, yeah, and I think, again, the House and the Senate will work their will. I think there is an appetite to do a robust bonding bill, and I say that bipartisanly, that, and I think when you get the minority leader of the House and the majority leader of the Senate after you hear our DFLers speak, that I think you'll hear some commonality around that there may be an appetite. I think it'll probably be hard to stretch a long ways, but I think they should be willing to listen. The tax cut debate, we did a tax bill last year. We did conformity. We did a revenue-neutral tax cut bill. We lifted the exemption on Social Security taxes to exempt far more Minnesotans, and we did the first rate cut in over 20 years. What I don't want to do is repeat the mistakes that we've seen at the federal level, where you give a tax cut that's unpaid that has trillion-dollar deficits, leading to $22 trillion in debt, or what we witnessed in Minnesota, where we went $6 billion in the hole. When you're talking about a tax cut, this money is one-time money. When you're talking about a tax cut, there are tails, and if I heard right the other day, that the budget chair didn't even want to say what those tails were, like they don't exist. So I'm going to urge caution here. I'll wait and let the legislature work their will. I'm certainly willing to hear where we come from, but I remind you, the difference between November and now, that $181 million, is 0.2% of revenues. What you also saw in this was 0.2% of spending cut. The entire budget surplus is less than 2% of the overall budget. I would have to tell you, if you're doing your household budget and you're coming in at 2% of where it's at, you don't make massive changes based on that, especially where we see yellow flashing lights in an economy that was precluding COVID-19. There were already reasons to be cautious. I think now this reinforces what I have been saying, and I think we'll see is, let's be smart about this. Let's invest in things that make a difference.
The end of your remarks there that you might pay for a coronavirus response. Would that be in a supplemental budget? What would it look like? How much?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Again, I think this is for the legislature, and I want to thank them. It looks like right away there was a pretty bipartisan move on this. Folks started talking about it immediately. I think the one good thing here is when you build up trust, and I mentioned our budgetary staff that's here. I think that same thing goes with Minnesota Department of Health. I think that long reputation of being a very robust public health organization and very frugal with their budgets improves that. So I think we'll just have to wait and see. I think it's on the early end. The one thing I can say is, coming this afternoon at 1 o'clock and at 1:30, there will be briefings for the legislative leaders by MDH and leadership, and there'll be a press briefing to see where we're at and how we're stepping up our responses. But that's exactly the type of thing that a supplemental budget should be used for.
Governor, there was an OLA report on the state of the corrections department and the prisons. It was a scathing report that suggested that a lot of money needs to be spent on things like data collection and analysis, on things like revamping the entire living units. Tons of money that could be spent there. Do you see putting some of this money at least toward that cause?
Yes.
Where would you focus it?
I think so. Well, first of all, the top priority when it comes to corrections is protections of the citizens of Minnesota, protection of those correction officers, and the responsibility of protection of those that are incarcerated. You heard this. This is not surprising. We asked them to do this. I think some of you in here might have been through this. If you have not, trying to get you out there, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible in corrections of getting in there. It's stunning when you go in the Stillwater prison or the St. Cloud prison. It is stunning because Shawshank comes to mind when you see it. There is a mechanical arm that you turn that opens all the cells 5 layers high. This is so far outdated, and the sight lines in these prisons are so dangerous, and then the situations, especially with Joseph Gom and others, of where we see an increase in attacks on corrections officers and inmates. I do think that makes sense, and I think it's one of the things we're going to have to address it with that, but I can't stress again, we have got to move upstream and get away from the incarcerations that we have that can be disproportional, making sure that we're doing things to fix that part of it so that we're not in a situation, because it is so expensive to incarcerate someone, and our facilities in Minnesota are grossly outdated. So we welcome the report that I think sheds light on this, and I want to make note, my responsibility to those correction officers and keeping folks secure in Minnesota and to the incarcerated has to be paramount. So I can expect you can see us talking about that.
Governor, before you came in, we hammered your commissioner a couple of different ways on the coronavirus, and basically said, you know, there's something going on. There's a debt ceiling, there's a stimulus, an economic whatever. There's always an asterisk on this. Does the coronavirus to you, though, feel like a different kind of asterisk than those other asterisks?
No, it's a good question, and we asked this a lot. As I said, is this the black swan you're looking for? Is this now? I asked about the impact of the economy that SARS had. I asked about Katrina, and they're not the same. They don't look exactly the same because there's maybe a little more predictability. And actually, our economics experts said actually a hurricane, you know, strangely enough, actually is an economic growth engine because of all the rebuilding that happens. That is not what's going to look like here. So what I can tell you is the economy, $21 trillion is big. The global interconnectedness, it's been a while since we've seen one like this. SARS maybe was the last one. I think it is prudent to keep an eye on that. I think maybe in an age because of Twitter and quick communications, it appears like people are talking a lot more about it. I think countries are taking this in a different way, and certainly Japan's interest is the Olympics and others. But before we came in here in the last hour, Japan just closed all schools in a country of 120 million people. That is a massive economic disruption in itself. So I do think keeping an eye on it, I do think the economists would tell you this over a long haul and a long period in this, that if that line gets long enough, the blip won't be enough. But I think the caution that we should feel in the economy, whether it was yield curves inverting, the other things that were starting to happen, it might not take much to push things. So I think for us, I think as an individual looking at this, taking this, that this can be, and we should take it from the individual basis, making sure we keep everyone safe, that it seems like it may absorb more space in the economy than it actually might in the long run. So we're watching it. It's another one of those things. We need to have the resources to direct it. But, you know, I don't know if it's just timing, as the president believed that it had more to do with the Democratic debate than it had to do with coronavirus. I think that would probably be a pretty big stretch. But just so you know where we're at, after what's happening today on the stock market, this is the biggest loss since November of 2008, right before the. So I'm certainly not predicting that, but I'm saying we certainly have seen, I think we've entered correction territory. We're at about 10% now that changed this week. The good news is for Minnesota is we're going to control the things we can control. That's why I want to tell people stay in our lane and stay focused. Put the budget reserves back, use historically low interest rates and our strong position to invest in the things Minnesota need, and then invest in those things that no matter what happens to the economy in the short term is the recipe for growth, investing in our children in the workforce going forward. That's the place that I'm going to say we can't control what happens with global economy because of coronavirus. We will control the spread, we will control the public health, we will do what we need to do, and we will stay focused on those things that we can control that will create good economic situations.
Governor, it sounded like you might be open to ongoing expenditures. Is that true? And is there a range, as opposed to one-time expenditures in your supplemental budget? Are you open to some ongoing appropriations?
I'm certainly open to listening to that. Yeah, I think so. And I hope after a year that you've seen this, I really try, because I respect the work that's going to come out of both the House and the Senate when they come together, that I think if I close the door on things with a emphatic no, it precludes our ability to do what we did last year. We compromised. Certainly I, signed on to things that certainly I might not have advocated for them, but they were in the best interest of Minnesota as part of an overall package. So yes, I'm leaving that open.
One more question to that?
May I return to the... Go ahead.
This report shows a drop in the number of pupils and education spending. How might that have any bearing on your education spending plans this session?
Well, I think you always have to, as new information comes on, those first counts on how we do this, the per pupil spending, that's what happened there. I think it's interesting of this $181 million, it was split almost equally between the reduction in spending, mainly because the counts that we anticipated were not there. But I think long term we have a pretty good idea of what's going, and those expenditures that we're making for our children, the thinking that I'm seeing coming out of the legislature and businesses and all concerned Minnesotans is, how do we make those smart investments and show results that come from it? So I don't think it necessarily changes where we're at. And again, I would caution folks, it's a big number. I don't make light of that, but it's less than 0.2% of the overall spending that was in there. So there's some anomalies that can go up and down.
One more over
Yeah,
here.
sure.
and then we got our-
Let me return to the OLA report.
Sure.
One of the jarring things, one of the things that the OLA discovered, it wasn't part of the corrections data, was the extent of sexual abuse and harassment of the female employees. There are 1,400 female employees in corrections. How do you respond to that, and how are you going to direct a reaction to that?
Yeah, it's totally unacceptable. And I too took that as somewhat of the, it's all shocking. We have to get this right. I don't think there was much of a surprise on some of it that came out of that. This one is that we have to create an environment where everyone feels safe. We have to create structures. We have to create statutory barriers to make sure that every employee feels safe. And you're exactly right. As we have a hard enough time attracting corrections officers in, we need to make sure that every single person is able to do that job because they feel safe and they feel protected. So I think this is going to be a deep dive on this. I think we're having this conversation in the legislature too. What do we do about sexual harassment? What do we do about making people safe in the workplace? And I know the responsibility that I have is to make sure that the state of Minnesota is a model employer. And if we've got folks that are working in corrections that are not safe and the data supports that, we need to make sure that we're doing the things necessary to both change the culture, invest in safety, and get to the heart of that. So that is unacceptable. So thank you all.